2016 was supposed to be the dawning of a new era for the Jacksonville Jaguars. You got a young quarterback with an exciting, explosive offense, a retooled and revamped, improved defense, with talent coming from the draft and free agency. Oh, the Jaguars are going to compete for the division. They're potentially a playoff team. They've really turned the corner. Yeah, all that shit didn't happen. After 13 games, the Jacksonville Jaguars sit at 2-11. Yet another lost, disastrous season where nothing is really accomplished. Yet another lost, disastrous season where you sit there and look at them and say, this is one of the worst organizations, not just in the NFL, but all of professional sports. I mean, this is horrible. And I'm sitting here looking at this team that continues to not get better, and if anything, regresses. And I really wonder how the fuck Gus Bradley and David Caldwell still have their jobs. Like, you look at Gus Bradley, excuse me. Let's start with him. Let's start with the head coach. You know, sometimes when things don't go well right away, you know, the easy thing to do is talk about the head coach and or general manager needs to get fired. From a fan's perspective, you know, sometimes we forget about these are people too. And sometimes we forget that, hey, you know, sometimes it takes time. But Jesus Christ, we're on year 4 now. I mean, granted, maybe they were all giggly tits about bringing him in from Seattle. Oh, he was the defensive coordinator. Same guy that left the year before they won the Super Bowl. Oh, maybe that should have indicated you had a problem here. He was desperate to be an NFL head coach and didn't necessarily get himself into a good situation. And frankly, a lot of defensive coordinators are going to look really, really good in Seattle when you have a Legion of Boom secondary featuring Pro Bowl All-Pro talents like Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman, linebackers such as Bobby Wagner, you know, defensive linemen such as Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill. It's pretty good to look good as a defensive coordinator when you've got those guys. Let's just put it that way. And so I understand that the thought process being, hey, you know, even with that talent, he was still the defensive coordinator that put these guys, these young players, into good positions, put them in positions to succeed. And there's something to be said about that. And the fact that he was around good people like John Schneider and Pete Carroll, a quality organization, maybe that would trickle over to Jacksonville. You know, and sometimes it works. And in this case, it most certainly didn't. Because in the first 3 full seasons of Gus Bradley, the defense, which is supposed to be his forte, never finished better than 26 in points allowed, never finished better than 24th in total yards allowed. Then you look at the offensive side of the ball. You've got a young quarterback who has not progressed and, if anything, has regressed now in year 3 when you're supposed to be at the point in time in Blake Bortles' career where he's really establishing himself as a franchise quarterback. You're at a position now in year 3 where he looks worse than he did as a rookie, and he has more pick sixes in his NFL career than he does victories as a starting quarterback. We're almost 4 full seasons through Gus Bradley's reign as the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and their record under him currently sits at 14-47. I saw an interesting stat on Twitter. I don't remember who put it out there, but I want to make sure I give credit to this. If Bill Belichick went 0-16 for the next 40 years, his career winning percentage as an NFL head coach would still be better than Gus Bradley's. I just want you to think about how terrible that means Gus Bradley has been as a head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. But you see it on the field. Even when you get talent in the draft and you get big money acquisitions in free agency, this defense isn't improving. They're not getting better. The offense, same thing. They've regressed in 2016. Does Gus Bradley, you know, have naked pictures of the Jacksonville Jaguars owner? Is he giving blowjobs to the Jacksonville Jaguars owner? Is he fucking the boss's daughter? All of those things would be the only reasons in the world why you could justify that Gus Bradley still has a job as this team's head coach. You know, sometimes people might sit there and say, it's not a good idea to fire a coach in the middle of the season, and in theory, maybe that's true. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes at some point in time, from an organizational standpoint, you have to set a standard, and you have to send a message. You have to let the players know. You have to let the other coaches know. You have to let the front office know. You have to let the rest of the league know that the Jacksonville Jaguars are not going to be about this life. That they're not going to be about being a big raging suckfest contending with the Cleveland Skidmarks to be actually the worst organization in the National Football League. You know, for all the shit I give the Cleveland Skidmarks, and legitimately so, And they are the worst organization, not just in football, but in professional sports. The Jacksonville Jaguars are nipping at their heels. And it's a lot closer than people want to give credit for. They're just terrible. You have to send a message at some point in time and saying it's not okay to suck. You have to perform. You have to produce. It's a results-driven business. And if you don't, you're going to be replaced. Because eventually, the message that you send to players, to your organization, to other teams, is that if you come to Jacksonville, hey, wins and losses really don't matter. We really don't care. You know, just show up, be here, don't get in trouble, and we'll be just fine with that. And as long as you allow Gus Bradley to continue to be your head coach, that's the type of message you're sending to your locker room. The only other possible outcome I could think of that as to why Gus Bradley still has a job as the coach of the Jaguars is that the owner is so pissed off and hates Gus Bradley so damn much for ripping him off of all that money over the past 4 years. And he says, no, if I've got to watch this shitty team the rest of the year, so do you right there on the goddamn sidelines. And I'm going to make sure that you suffer. I'm going to make sure that you go down with this sinking ship and that I sabotage the rest of your career and you will never ever be an NFL head coach anywhere else. Now, I get that approach from the Jacksonville Jaguars owner. I get why Khan would have that mentality because he should feel burned. He should be pissed off because Gus Bradley absolutely fucking sucks. But I'm sorry, at some point in time, you've waited long enough. This message should have already been sent. As soon as this team got to 7 losses, it should have been all she wrote. Because maybe it shakes some of the younger players to their core. Maybe it sends the right type of message. Maybe you get more out of the players the second half of the year and you build some positive momentum heading into 2017. Now, you've continued to saddle them with this suckfest of a head coach. Now they just don't care. You're not going to build any positive momentum for the next year. You're not going to get anything rolling in the right direction. You're just going to continue to be the Jacksonville Jaguars staring down the barrel of yet another top 5 pick in the NFL draft. But it's not just Gus Bradley. The general manager, David Caldwell, if anything, deserves just as much of the blame, if not more so, because first and foremost, he's the one that hired this sack of shit Gus Bradley to begin with. You know, as a general manager, the 2 most important things you can ever do, the 2 most important hires you ever have, or moves that you make, however you want to put it, is your head coach and your quarterback. Depending on your perspective, it might be quarterback 1A, head coach 1B. But it really goes hand in hand. You got to get your head coach and your quarterback right. If you do, you look like a genius as general manager. I go back to the Seattle example, John Schneider, Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, you look like a genius. Absolute genius. What more can you say? Or if you're the Cleveland Browns and it's Mike Pettin and Johnny Manziel, you look like the skid marks you are. Because obviously that didn't work. So he hires Gus Bradley. So he was wrong. You look at some of his draft history. I go back to his first draft in 2013. David Caldwell, the 2nd overall pick, took Luke Joeckel when Lane Johnson was still on the board. I believe Lane Johnson has made it to the Pro Bowl. Luke Joeckel isn't a starter, isn't doing anything. In the 2nd round, they took Jonathan Cyprien, a safety out of Florida International. A few picks later, the Detroit Lions took a corner out of Mississippi State, Darius Slay, who has made it to the Pro Bowl himself. In the 3rd round, they took Dwayne Gratz, another another defensive back, a corner this time out of UConn. And a few picks later, Honey Badger Tyrann Mathieu went to the Arizona Cardinals, and he has subsequently made it to a Pro Bowl. So with their first 3 picks, the Jacksonville Jaguars took guys at a position where they could have had superior prospects at that same position. Now, it doesn't mean that they would be Super Bowl contenders, but you would have to think this organization would be in a little bit better shape if their first 3 picks in the 2013 draft were Lane Johnson, Darius Slay, and Tyrann Mathieu instead of Luke Joeckel, Jonathan Cyprien, and Dwayne Gratz. Now, for some of you, you will say hindsight is 20/20, and touche, perhaps it is. But you know what? At the end of the day, this is your job as a general manager for your front office, your scouting department, to get this shit right. And obviously they didn't. And then you look at 2014. The big surprise, third overall. The Jaguars take Blake Bortles out of Central Florida. There's a reason it was a big surprise. Is because it was a massive fucking reach. And for anybody in their right mind to think that Blake Bortles was worth a top 5 pick, that should have been a grave indication right then and there that the person was an idiot, clearly in over his head, and should have been immediately subsequently fired. And what makes that so bad is not only did David Caldwell have a hard-on for Blake Bortles, all of his scouts did. Gus Bradley did. They took Blake Bortles. Maybe that defense would look a whole lot meaner and nastier if they would have taken Khalil Mack out of Buffalo. I'm just saying. And then you look at free agency. You overpay to bring in somebody like a Julius Thomas, who was a third option in the passing game in Denver. Jared Odrick, a role player from Miami. A little bit better than a role player, but still, you pay him superstar impact player type of money, and he was never going to be that guy. Then this past offseason, you bring in Malik Jackson from the Super Bowl champion Denver Broncos. You go back to the Broncos, well, like you did with Julius Thomas. This time you pay a guy huge money to play in an entirely different system, an entirely different position than what he played that made him successful at Denver. That makes absolutely no fucking sense. You bring in a guy who was very successful in a 3-4 and try to cram him into your shitty 4-3. And I'm not saying Malik Jackson's been terrible, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it hasn't made the defense any better, and you wonder fucking why. David Caldwell, for screwing up really the first 2 drafts, especially when it comes to the drafting of the quarterback, you think about it this way. The Raiders in 2014 took Khalil Mack in round 1, Derek Carr in round 2, and they're going to make the playoffs this year. And that's, mind you, after 2013's draft, where they took DJ Hayden in round 1 and Mendelek Watson in round 2. So there's an immediate precedent for one team screwed up one draft and then hit a home run the next draft. And the Jaguars, in a lot of ways, could have done the same type of thing, and instead they Jaguared it. How the hell David Caldwell has a job when he's the bum that hired the bum Bradley to fucking begin with, and he blew the first couple of drafts for this organization, in particular blew the assessment of Blake Bortles, is beyond fucking me. I don't care what type of message the owner is trying to send at this point. I don't give a fuck what anybody says about the logic of letting these guys finish out the string because it is what it is and the season has already happened. No, that's bullshit. You're basically allowing these guys to coast through a lame duck season, 3 more games, basically teaching your players, your organization, and others around the league that if you're in Jacksonville, it's okay to do that. It's okay to not work hard. It's okay to not improve. It's okay to not get better. It's okay not to try. It's okay to not succeed and ultimately win National Football League fucking games. Gus Bradley and David Caldwell should have long since been packing. And the fact that they haven't absolutely blows my mind because it's ridiculous.